November 18, 1987, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Allegheny Cemetery. 34-year-old Dorothy Callahan stands at her husband's fresh grave and realizes she's burying a man she never truly knew. Warren Callahan died of a heart attack 9 days ago, at 43 years old, suddenly, in the middle of the night, without even calling for help. 11 years of marriage, and only now, as his casket descends into the cold November earth, does Dorothy understand. Her husband spent his entire life silent about something so terrible that the silence itself killed him. Warren never spoke about his childhood. Every question received the same answer. Grew up in state care. Don't remember my folks. Nothing worth telling. Dorothy accepted this as fact. Many in their generation grew up without families. The Depression, the war, ordinary tragedies. She didn't press, didn't dig deeper. Now, she regrets it. The funeral ended quickly. Colleagues from the Westinghouse plant attended, stood respectfully, dispersed. Warren worked as a mechanical draftsman at the defense facility in East Pittsburgh. Quiet, unremarkable, performed his work competently but without passion. He had no friends. Dorothy remained at the graveside alone, staring at the wreaths, thinking about the life stretching ahead of her, unable to imagine how to live it. 3 days after the funeral, she began sorting through Warren's belongings. Their apartment was a 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a brick building in Squirrel Hill, purchased only 18 months ago after years of saving. Warren was meticulous. Books on shelves arranged by height, shirts in the closet spaced evenly apart. Dorothy folded his suits into boxes to sell at the consignment shop and cried. Not from grief, from emptiness. She left the workshop for last. Warren spent every weekend there, in the building's basement storage room he'd converted into his private space, working on a 1953 Buick he'd bought in pieces. Dorothy rarely entered. This was his territory. Now she unlocked the padlock, switched on the bare bulb overhead, and looked around. The car sat on jack stands, surrounded by tools, oil cans, and shelves of parts. Everything clean, organized, labeled. Classic Warren. On the top shelf, behind a box of bolts, she noticed a worn composition notebook with a black marbled cover. She pulled it out, opened it. Inside were blueprints, drawn in pencil with a ruler, extraordinarily precise. Dorothy initially assumed these were technical sketches from the plant, but examining them closer, she understood. These were floor plans. Rooms, hallways, staircases. Below each blueprint, annotations. Dormitory 4, 2nd floor, east-facing windows. Dining hall, 1st floor, capacity 24 tables. Isolation room, basement, no windows, steel door. She turned pages, feeling cold creep up her spine. These weren't just plans, they were memories materialized in lines and measurements. Warren had drawn the place where he spent his childhood. Each room drafted with an engineer's precision, every corner calculated, every door numbered. 43 pages of blueprints, 43 pages of childhood converted into technical documentation. On the final page, separate from the blueprints, in small handwriting, Riverside Boys Home, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, Route 23 near Churchtown. Director Harlan Whitmore, born 1899. Operated 1935 to 1954. I was there 1944 to 1954. 10 years. Need to find this place. Need to understand why. Below the note, a date, September 14th, 1987. 2 months before his death. Dorothy sat on the concrete workshop floor, pressing the notebook to her chest. Warren had searched for answers his entire life, drew these blueprints, trying to reconstruct from memory every foot of the building where he'd been kept as a child. And he found the address just before dying. But he never went, or was too afraid. She returned upstairs, made strong coffee, spread the notebook on the kitchen table, and began studying the blueprints methodically, as she would study technical documentation at work. Dorothy worked as a production scheduler at Westinghouse alongside Warren, accustomed to precision. The building proved to be 3 stories with a basement and attic. First floor contained the dining hall, kitchen, administrative offices. Second and third floors held dormitories, 6 rooms per floor, 8 beds each. 96 total capacity. In the basement, Warren had drawn several spaces: boiler room, storage, and separately with thick walls, isolation room. Next to the isolation notation, I spent 19 days here. Winter 1948. I was 10 years old. 10 years old. 19 days in the basement. For what? Dorothy closed her eyes, pictured her husband as a child, alone in that cold cell, and felt sick. She ran to the bathroom and vomited. Then she stood gripping the sink, staring at her reflection, thinking, if Warren could live with this for 33 years, she could find the truth. The next morning, November 21st, Dorothy requested 3 personal days from work and drove to Lancaster County. She found Churchtown on the map, 85 miles southeast of Pittsburgh, a dot among farmland. The drive took 2.5 hours through rolling Pennsylvania countryside. Churchtown proved tiny, barely a crossroads, a general store, a church, scattered farms. Route 23 ran straight through. She drove slowly, searching. The building stood set back from the road, behind overgrown hedges and a collapsing fence. 3 stories, brick, with peeling white paint on the window frames, broken glass, a sagging roof. Abandoned. Dorothy pulled her Chevrolet to the shoulder, grabbed the notebook and her camera, and approached. The structure matched Warren's blueprints exactly. She pushed through the gate. It scraped across cracked pavement. Climbed rotting porch steps, pushed the front door. It swung open. Inside smelled of mildew, decay, and something else Dorothy couldn't identify. Something old and dead. She pulled out the notebook, a flashlight, and began comparing reality to blueprints. First floor corridor, exactly as Warren drew it. Dining hall to the left, present. Kitchen behind the dining hall, yes. Offices to the right, 3 doors in sequence. Everything matched to the inch. Warren hadn't made a single error, though he'd drawn from memory 33 years after his release. Dorothy climbed to the second floor. Dormitories empty except for rusted iron bed frames pushed into corners. Walls covered in mold, floorboards rotted through. She entered room number 4, the one Warren labeled Dormitory 4, second floor, east-facing windows. The windows indeed faced east. 8 bed frames. Dorothy stood in the center, imagined 8 children sleeping here, one of them her husband, a thin, silent, frightened 10-year-old boy. Then she descended to the basement. Narrow concrete stairs, damp, treacherous. The flashlight beam caught fragments of walls, pipes, cobwebs. Below, several doors. Dorothy opened the first, boiler room, massive rusted furnace. Second, storage, empty. Third. Behind the third door was a small room, perhaps 7 by 10 feet, windowless, with an iron cot bolted to the floor. On the wall near the headboard, scratched in a child's uncertain handwriting, "Mama, where are you?" The letters crude, shaky, a child who'd barely learned to write. Dorothy left the basement, left the building, stood outside breathing cold November air, unable to stop shaking. Then she went back inside, retrieved her Kodak camera from her bag, and began photographing. The facade, corridors, dormitories, offices, basement, isolation room. The scratched message. She used 2 rolls of film, 48 exposures. Then she sat on the porch steps and stared at the surrounding farmland for a long time. Quiet. Deserted. A perfect place to hide children nobody was meant to know about. That evening, Dorothy returned to Pittsburgh. At home, she reread Warren's final note. Director Harlan Whitmore, born 1899. If he was born in 1899, he'd be 88 now. retired or dead. She needed to find out. Dorothy pulled out the phone book, found the number for the Pennsylvania Department of Public Welfare in Harrisburg, called. The receptionist who answered said that Mr. Harlan Whitmore served as Regional Director of Child Welfare Services, though he was currently on medical leave due to his age. She hung up and laughed until tears ran down her face. The man who'd kept her husband in a basement cell now held a senior position overseeing child welfare across the region. Had an office, staff, commendations, awards. Living comfortably on a government pension, preparing to tell grandchildren how he'd served the cause of caring for Pennsylvania's vulnerable youth. Dorothy didn't sleep that night. In the morning, November 22nd, she had the film developed at a shop near her apartment. The owner asked no questions, processed it quickly. The photographs came out sharp and terrible. The abandoned building with its hollow window sockets, rusted bed frames, the basement, the isolation room, the scratched plea on the wall. Then she went to the offices of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. She'd read that newspapers were publishing investigations now, exposing old scandals, asking hard questions about institutions. Dorothy requested a meeting with an editor. After a 20-minute wait, she was shown into the office of Margaret Halstead, assistant managing editor, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Dorothy laid the photographs and notebook on the desk. "My husband died 10 days ago," she said. "His whole life, he tried to find the place where he was kept as a child. Found it 2 months before he died, but never made the trip. I went instead. This is that place. Riverside Boys Home, Churchtown, Lancaster County. Director Harlan Whitmore, currently Regional Director of Child Welfare Services. I want people to know what happened there." Halstead silently examined the photographs, then opened the notebook and studied the blueprints. Her expression remained neutral, but her hands trembled slightly. "You understand this is a serious accusation," she said. "Whitmore is a prominent official, decorated public servant. If we print this, we'll need to substantiate every claim." "I can substantiate it," Dorothy replied. "I have my husband's notebook. I have photographs of a building that matches his blueprints perfectly. I have the address. I have the director's name. If you publish this story, others will come forward. Others who were there. They'll tell what they know." Halstead lit a cigarette, gazed out the window for a long moment, then nodded. "All right," she said. "I'll assign this to our best investigative reporter, Thomas Riley, young but sharp. He'll drive to Churchtown, verify everything, interview locals. If he finds corroboration, we'll publish. But you should understand, this could make powerful people very unhappy." "I don't care anymore," Dorothy said. Thomas Riley turned out to be a man in his early 30s, lanky, wearing a worn tweed jacket, with a notebook perpetually in his pocket. He came to Dorothy's apartment that evening, listened to her account, studied the notebook, examined the photographs. Asked precise questions, no wasted words. Wrote everything in his notebook. "I'll drive to Churchtown tomorrow," he said. "Talk to locals. Check township records if they exist. Then I'll try to locate former residents of the home." "Did your husband remember anyone he was there with?" Dorothy shook her head. "He never spoke about it." "But there's a name scratched in the isolation room wall. Maybe that helps." "Maybe," Riley said. "I'll photograph it myself. Can you show me exactly where the building is?" Dorothy drew him a map. Riley left. Dorothy sat alone in the apartment, looking at Warren's blueprint spread across the table, and thought, now it begins. Now the truth comes into daylight. Whatever happens next, Warren's silence is broken. Riley returned 4 days later with 2 notebooks full of notes and 3 rolls of film. Sat at Dorothy's kitchen table, coffee mug in hand, face exhausted. "I found it," he said. "The building's exactly as you described. I photographed everything, matched your husband's blueprints point by point. Every room, every notation, perfect correspondence. Then I went to the township office in Lidditz. Found records. Riverside Boys Home operated from 1935 to 1954. licensed by the state as a residential facility for dependent children. Director listed as Harlan R. Whitmore. Closed in 1954, reason given as facility relocation. Did you find anyone who remembers it? Dorothy asked. 3 people, Riley said. Elderly residents in Churchtown. They remembered the place. Said it was for problem boys, children nobody wanted. Said Whitmore ran it strict, kept the boys isolated, didn't allow visits from outsiders. One woman, Mrs. Gretchen Yoder, she's 82, lives in a farmhouse near the site. She said when she was young she'd hear children crying at night, especially in winter. Said it troubled her, but people didn't ask questions back then, especially about state facilities. Dorothy felt her throat tighten. Did you find any of the boys? The ones who were there? Riley nodded slowly. I found 3. Took work, went through township birth records, cross-referenced with state welfare archives. 3 men, all in their 40s and 50s now. All lived at Riverside between 1944 and 1953. I called them. 2 refused to talk. The 3rd agreed to meet. His name is Leonard Brubaker, lives in Reading, works as a foreman at a textile mill. He said he'd speak on record if we protect certain details. He's terrified Whitmore will retaliate. Can we meet him? Dorothy asked. He's coming here, Riley said. Tomorrow, 2 o'clock. He wants to see the blueprints your husband drew. He said it might help him remember. Leonard Brubaker arrived at Dorothy's apartment the next afternoon. He was a stocky man with gray hair, calloused hands, nervous eyes, wore work boots and a flannel shirt, shook Dorothy's hand gently as though afraid of breaking something. Ma'am, he said quietly, I'm sorry about your husband. I heard he passed recently. Yes, Dorothy said, but he left these behind. She showed him the notebook. Brubaker sat at the table, opened the notebook, and started turning pages. His hands began to shake. He traced the lines of the blueprints with one finger. This is it, he whispered. Jesus Christ, this is exactly it. Whoever drew these knew the place, room by room. My husband drew them, Dorothy said, from memory. He was there from 1944 to 1954. Brubaker looked up, eyes wet. What was his name? Warren Callahan. Brubaker closed his eyes, thinking, I don't remember a Warren. But there were so many of us. They moved boys in and out, and we weren't encouraged to make friends. Whitmore kept us apart, separated us if we got too close to anyone. Said it made us soft. Will you tell us what it was like? Riley asked gently, notebook open. Brubaker nodded, took a long breath. I was sent there in 1945, he said. I was 8 years old. My mother died of pneumonia. My father was in the Pacific with the Army. I had no other family. The county placed me at Riverside. They said it was temporary until my father came home. But my father didn't come home. Killed at Okinawa in early '45. So I stayed. He paused, swallowed hard. Whitmore ran the place like a military camp. We woke at 5:30, did calisthenics in the yard, then breakfast. Oatmeal, every day. Then chores, cleaning, laundry, maintenance. School was 3 hours a day, taught by Whitmore's wife, Constance. She was kinder than him, but scared. She never contradicted him. After lunch, more chores. Dinner at 6. Bed at 8. Lights out. No talking. If you broke rules, you went to isolation. The basement room, Dorothy asked. Yes, Brubaker said. The hole, we called it. Whitmore would lock you in there for days. No light, no heat. Bread and water once a day. I went there twice. First time for 3 days because I stole an extra piece of bread from the kitchen. I was hungry. We were always hungry. Second time for a week because I tried to run away. I was 11. Made it about 5 miles before they found me. How many boys were usually there? Riley asked. Varied, Brubaker said. Maybe 70, 80 at any time. All ages, 6 to 16. When you turned 16, they sent you out. Army if it was wartime, factory work otherwise. I left in 1953 when I was 16. Whitmore gave me a bus ticket to Reading and $20. Said I was on my own now, and if I caused trouble or spoke about Riverside, he'd make sure I regretted it. Did anyone die there? Dorothy asked quietly. Brubaker's face went pale. He didn't answer for a long time. Yes, he finally said. 3 boys that I know of. One drowned in the creek behind the building. Whitmore said it was an accident, that the boy was swimming without permission. One died of pneumonia in the isolation room. Whitmore said he'd been ill already, that the isolation wasn't a factor. One hanged himself in the attic. I found him. I was 14. His name was Eugene Potter. He was 12. I don't know what Whitmore did to him, but Eugene was in isolation for 2 weeks before that, and when he came out, he wasn't right. Didn't talk, didn't eat. Week later, he was dead. Dorothy felt bile rise in her throat. Riley wrote steadily, face grim. Did anyone investigate? Riley asked. County sheriff came for the hanging, Brubaker said. Wrote it up as suicide. Didn't ask questions. Riverside was a state facility, state licensed. Whitmore had friends in Harrisburg. Nobody wanted trouble. Will you testify to this? Riley asked. On record for publication? Brubaker hesitated, then nodded. Yes. I'm 50 years old. I've got a wife and 3 kids. And I wake up screaming twice a week because I dream I'm back in that basement. If printing this stops Whitmore from ever hurting another child, I'll testify. Riley worked for 3 weeks. He tracked down 2 more former residents willing to speak. Both corroborated Brubaker's account. He obtained state licensing records showing Riverside operated with minimal oversight. He interviewed Gretchen Yoder and 2 other elderly locals. He photographed the building again, this time with a professional camera, capturing details Dorothy had missed. Then, he went to Harrisburg and requested an interview with Harlan Whitmore. Whitmore's secretary said the regional director was unavailable due to health issues. Riley persisted. Eventually, Whitmore agreed to a written response to submitted questions. Riley's questions were direct. Did you operate Riverside Boys Home from 1935 to 1954? Did you use isolation as a disciplinary method? Can you account for the deaths of 3 boys during your tenure? Did you maintain proper state-mandated records of disciplinary actions and medical care? Whitmore's response came 2 days later, typed on official letterhead. Riverside Boys Home was a licensed facility providing care for dependent and delinquent youth during a difficult period in our nation's history. Discipline was firm but fair, consistent with standards of the era. All deaths were investigated by appropriate authorities and determined to be unrelated to institutional conduct. I reject any insinuation of impropriety and consider these questions defamatory. Riley showed the response to Margaret Halstead. She read it, smiled coldly. He's terrified, she said. This response is pure defensiveness. We're publishing. The article ran on the front page of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette on December 14, 1987. The headline, Former State Home for Boys, Allegations of Abuse, Neglect, Deaths. Riley's byline, 3,000 words, meticulously sourced. Photographs of the abandoned building. Excerpts from Warren's blueprints. Testimony from Leonard Brubaker and 2 other former residents, identified by pseudonyms for protection. Details of 3 deaths. Whitmore's non-denial denial. And prominently featured, Dorothy Callahan, widow of Warren Callahan, a former Riverside resident who died in November, discovered these blueprints in her husband's workshop. He spent his life trying to understand what happened to him, Mrs. Callahan told the Post-Gazette. I want people to know the truth. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 24 hours, the newspaper received 43 phone calls from people claiming connection to Riverside Boys Home. Former residents, relatives of former residents, people who'd worked there briefly, people who'd lived nearby, all with stories. Within 48 hours, Pennsylvania state legislators began asking questions. the Department of Public Welfare announced an internal investigation. Harlan Whitmore was placed on indefinite administrative leave. Within 72 hours, the Philadelphia Inquirer picked up the story. Then the Harrisburg Patriot News. Then the Associated Press wire service. By December 20th, newspapers across Pennsylvania were running variations of the investigation. Dorothy's phone rang constantly, reporters requesting interviews, former Riverside residents wanting to speak with her, lawyers asking if she'd considered litigation. She disconnected the phone, overwhelmed. On December 23rd, Thomas Riley came to her apartment with another man, tall, thin, in his late 40s with kind eyes. "Dorothy, this is Dr. Marcus Webb," Riley said. "He's a psychiatrist at Western Psychiatric Hospital, specializes in trauma. He's been following the Riverside story and wants to help." Webb shook Dorothy's hand. "Mrs. Callahan," he said, "I've worked with trauma survivors for 20 years. What happened at Riverside, the isolation, the fear, the systematic cruelty, leaves deep psychological scars. Many of the men contacting the newspaper are experiencing serious distress as these memories resurface. I'd like to establish a support group for former residents, free of charge. I think they need a place to speak safely, to heal together. Would you be willing to participate? Your husband's story has given them courage. Your presence might help." Dorothy considered this. She'd spent weeks feeling adrift, purposeless. Warren's blueprints had opened this investigation, but what came next? Just exposure? Just punishment for Whitmore? Or something more meaningful? "Yes," she said. "I'll help however I can." The first support group meeting took place on January 12, 1988, in a church basement in Oakland. Dr. Webb facilitated. 15 men attended, ages 45 to 60, all former Riverside residents. Dorothy came, bringing Warren's notebook. The men sat in a circle, nervous, hesitant. Webb explained the ground rules: confidentiality, respect, no judgment. Then, he invited anyone to speak who felt ready. Leonard Brubaker went first, told his story: 8 years old, orphaned, sent to Riverside, the isolation room, the hunger, the fear. Others followed. Each story similar in outline, unique in detail. A man named Russell Kowalski described being beaten with a leather strap for wetting his bed at age 7. A man named Chester Devine described watching Harlan Whitmore drag a boy down to the basement by his hair, the boy screaming, nobody intervening. A man named Paul Dietrich described the chronic malnutrition, the way boys fought over scraps, the way some boys became cruel to survive. Dorothy listened, tears streaming down her face, understanding finally what Warren had carried silently for 33 years. This weight. This knowledge that childhood should have meant safety, love, growth, but instead meant survival, fear, damage. When the stories finished, the room sat in silence. Then, Dorothy spoke. "My husband never told me any of this," she said quietly. "But he drew blueprints of Riverside, room by room, from memory. He spent his life trying to make sense of what happened. He died without answers. But maybe," she paused, looked around the circle, "maybe together, we can find something he couldn't find alone. Not answers exactly, but healing, understanding, justice." One of the men, an older fellow named Vincent DeLuca, nodded slowly. "What kind of justice, Mrs. Callahan? Whitmore's an old man now. Even if they prosecute, what will that accomplish?" "I don't know about criminal prosecution," Dorothy said, "but acknowledgement, public record, making sure this can never happen again, making sure the boys who died aren't forgotten, making sure you, all of you, aren't forgotten." "How?" asked Russell Kowalski. Dorothy thought about this. "Documentation," she said. "We gather every story, every name, every detail. We create a record that can't be erased. We find the families of the boys who died and tell them the truth. We demand the state release all records. We make this matter." The men looked at each other. Slowly, one by one, they nodded. Thus began what would become the Riverside Documentation Project. Over the next 6 months, Dorothy and Dr. Webb, with assistance from Thomas Riley, conducted systematic interviews with 47 former Riverside residents. Each interview recorded, transcribed, archived. They gathered names of every boy anyone could remember, over 200 names. They researched what happened to each one. Who survived, who died, where they ended up. They discovered that Eugene Potter, the 12-year-old who hanged himself, had an older sister still living in Lancaster. Dorothy drove to meet her. Sarah Potter Sullivan was 56, a retired schoolteacher, widowed. She wept when Dorothy showed her the documentation of her brother's death. "I always wondered," Sarah said. "He was sent to Riverside when I was 16. I was already married, couldn't take him. County said it was best for him, that he'd be cared for. Then they told me he died, said it was an accident, wouldn't let me see the body. I suspected something was wrong, but I was young. I didn't know how to fight the state. I've carried guilt for 40 years. It wasn't your fault," Dorothy said. "It was Whitmore's, and the system that enabled him." Sarah joined the project. So did relatives of the 2 other boys who died. Families who'd been lied to, who'd never known the truth. In May 1988, the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office announced formal investigation into Riverside Boys' Home and the state's oversight of residential facilities during the 1930s to 1950s. Subpoenaed records revealed systematic failures, inadequate inspections, ignored complaints, missing documentation of deaths and injuries. Harlan Whitmore was called to testify before a state legislative committee. He arrived in a wheelchair, 89 years old, frail, claiming memory loss. When pressed about isolation cells, beatings, deaths, he repeated the same response. "I provided care consistent with the standards of that time. I reject allegations of abuse." The committee didn't have authority to prosecute. Too much time had passed, statutes of limitation expired. But they issued a scathing report condemning Whitmore's operation of Riverside and the state's failure to protect vulnerable children. The report recommended policy reforms, victim compensation, and public memorialization. Whitmore resigned from all positions. Died 8 months later, February 1989, at home, quietly. No prosecution, no admission of guilt. But his legacy destroyed, his reputation in ruins. For Dorothy, this felt incomplete. Whitmore died unpunished. The boys suffered irreparably. Where was the meaning? Then, in March 1989, Dr. Webb approached her with an idea. "The men in our support group want to do something constructive," he said. "They want to help other survivors of institutional abuse find their histories, their families, their identities." Many boys sent to places like Riverside lost all connection to their origins. What if we created an organization dedicated to helping people reconnect? Riverside Boys Helping Others, turning their pain into purpose. Dorothy felt something shift inside her. Yes, this was what Warren would want. Not revenge, restoration. They founded the organization in April 1989, called it Find the Way Home. Nonprofit, volunteer-run. Mission: assist adults separated from families as children to locate relatives, obtain records, understand their histories. Dorothy served as director, Dr. Webb as clinical advisor. Leonard Brubaker, Russell Kowalski, and 6 other former Riverside residents formed the board. The work started small. Advertisements in newspapers. Were you placed in institutional care as a child? Lost contact with family? We can help. They received 37 inquiries the first month. Dorothy handled each personally, methodically. Obtained birth certificates, welfare records, tracked down relatives. Reunited 3 people with siblings in the first 6 months. Word spread. By 1990, Find the Way Home received over 100 inquiries monthly. They recruited volunteers, mostly former residents of various institutions, orphanages, reform schools, children's homes across Pennsylvania and neighboring states. People who understood the loss, the hunger for connection. Dorothy became expert in genealogical research, public records navigation, bureaucratic persistence. She spent 60 hours weekly on the project, unpaid. Her savings from Warren's life insurance funded operations initially, supplemented by donations. In 1991, they reunited a 63-year-old man with his sister, separated in 1932 when he was sent to a New Jersey orphanage. The siblings hadn't seen each other in 59 years. The reunion, facilitated by Find the Way Home, took place in Dorothy's office. The man and his sister embraced, sobbing. Dorothy watched, thinking, "This is what Warren's blueprints created. Connection. Restoration. Not just for him, but for hundreds." By 1993, Find the Way Home had assisted over 300 people. Media coverage brought more inquiries. The organization expanded, opened satellite offices in Philadelphia and Harrisburg. Other states noticed, began similar programs modeled on their work. Dorothy continued living in the same Squirrel Hill apartment, never remarried, devoted herself entirely to the work. People asked why. She had no obligation, could have moved on, started over. She always gave the same answer. Warren spent his life searching. I'm finishing his search. In 1995, Pennsylvania formally apologized for failures in oversight of residential facilities for children during the 1930s to 1960s. The state legislature established a victim compensation fund and mandated public record-keeping of institutional abuse. Dorothy testified at the hearings, bringing Warren's notebook, showing legislators what one man's memory had uncovered. That same year, the Pittsburgh History and Landmarks Foundation approached Dorothy about preserving Warren's blueprints as historical artifacts. She agreed. The blueprints, along with documentation from the Riverside investigation and Find the Way Home's work, became part of an exhibit titled Remembered: Children's Voices from Pennsylvania's Forgotten Institutions. The exhibit opened in October 1995 at the Heinz History Center. Dorothy attended, stood before the glass case containing Warren's notebook, and felt a circle closing. Warren's private trauma, rendered in precise lines and measurements, now public testimony. His silence transformed into witness. That night, she returned home, sat at the kitchen table where she'd first examined Warren's blueprints 8 years earlier, and wrote him a letter. She'd never done this before. It felt foolish, writing to the dead. But words came easily. Dear Warren, I found your blueprints. I found Riverside. I found the truth about what happened to you. I'm sorry you carried this alone. I'm sorry I didn't ask better questions when you were alive. But I'm trying to finish what you started. We've helped hundreds of people find their families. We've exposed what Whitmore did. We've changed laws. Your drawings, those careful, perfect lines you made in the quiet of the workshop, they changed lives. I think about you every day. I think about the boy you were, locked in that basement, scratching messages on walls, surviving. And I think about the man you became, gentle, silent, wounded, but still standing. You were braver than you knew. I hope wherever you are, you've found peace. I hope you know your life mattered. Not just to me, to hundreds of people you'll never meet, whose lives are different because you drew those blueprints. I love you. I'm still here. I'm still working. Dorothy. She folded the letter, placed it in the back of Warren's notebook, now returned to her after the exhibit's completion. The work continued. Through the late 1990s and into the new millennium, Find the Way Home expanded nationally. Other organizations formed, doing similar work. Dorothy mentored their founders, shared methodologies, advocated for policy reforms. In 2003, a researcher from Penn State contacted Dorothy. Professor Helen Adler was studying post-war child welfare systems and wanted to examine Riverside documentation. Dorothy provided access to everything: transcripts, records, photographs. Adler's research led to a surprising discovery. While cross-referencing Riverside records with state welfare databases, she found an anomaly. 2 infant boys admitted to county welfare custody on the same day in May 1938, both listed as baby boy Callahan, foundling, approximate age 6 months. They'd been given different case numbers and different names by the intake officer. One became Warren. The other became William. William Callahan had been transferred in 1939 to another facility in western Pennsylvania, a state home near Erie. Adler tracked his records forward. Released at 16 in 1954, enlisted in the Navy, served until 1962, settled in Buffalo, worked as a machinist, still alive. Adler called Dorothy. "Mrs. Callahan," she said, "I think your husband had a twin brother." Dorothy couldn't speak for a moment. Then, "Are you certain?" "As certain as possible given incomplete records," Adler said. They were found together, abandoned at a firehouse in Pittsburgh, May 1938. County welfare took them, initially kept them together, then separated them when Riverside took Warren in 1944, and Erie County took William in 1939. No record indicates anyone told either boy about the other. "Does William know?" Dorothy asked. "I haven't contacted him," Adler said. "I thought you should know first." Dorothy sat down, hands shaking. Warren had a brother, a twin. They'd been separated as infants, spent their childhoods in different institutions, never knowing each other existed. Warren searched for his past, drew blueprints, tried to understand his origins, and died without discovering the most fundamental truth. He wasn't alone. He'd had a brother all along. "Find him," Dorothy said. "Please. Find William and tell him about Warren." Adler located William Callahan in Buffalo within a week. He was 65 years old, retired, widowed, with 2 grown daughters. Adler called him, explained her research, told him about Riverside, about Warren, about the blueprints. William's initial reaction was disbelief, then anger, at the state, at the system that split them. Then overwhelming grief for the brother he'd never known. He called Dorothy. They spoke for 2 hours. William described his childhood at the Erie facility, similar to Riverside, institutional, cold, but less brutal. He described always feeling incomplete, like something essential was missing. He'd searched for his origins too, hit dead ends, eventually given up. "I drew maps," William told Dorothy. "All through my 20s and 30s, I drew maps of the area around the Erie home, trying to remember routes, landmarks, places I'd seen, trying to make sense of where I'd been. I couldn't explain why. It just felt necessary." "Warren drew blueprints," Dorothy said softly, "of Riverside, room by room. He was trying to make sense of it too. We were both draftsmen," William said, wonder in his voice. "Different kinds, but the same impulse, drawing what we remembered, trying to find our way back." They met in Pittsburgh in August 2003. William drove down with his daughters. Dorothy met them at Warren's grave. William stood silently before the headstone, then knelt, placed his hand on the granite. "Hello, brother," he said quietly. "I wish we'd had time." Dorothy showed him Warren's blueprints, the original notebook preserved carefully. William turned pages, studying each drawing, tears running down his face. "He was so precise," William said, "so careful. These could be construction documents." "He was a draftsman at Westinghouse," Dorothy said. "Mechanical drawings, specifications. This was his language." "Mine too," William said. "I did tooling diagrams at the machine shop. Technical drawing was the only thing that made sense after the Navy." He looked up. "Can I show you something?" He retrieved a folder from his car. Inside, hand-drawn maps, detailed, annotated maps of streets, buildings, landmarks around Erie, drawn in pencil with notes. Different from Warren's architectural precision, but the same intent. Memory rendered visible, trauma transformed into documentation. "Jesus," Dorothy whispered, "you were both doing the same thing, trying to draw your way home." William nodded. And we never knew we were drawing toward each other. They spent 3 days together. Dorothy showed William everything. The Riverside investigation files, Find the Way Home's archives, the exhibit materials, press coverage. William absorbed it all, asked questions, contributed his own institutional memories. On the final day, William asked, "Can I help? With Find the Way Home? I'm retired, I've got time. If my brother started this work, indirectly, I'd like to continue it." Dorothy smiled. "Yes," she said, "we need volunteers, people who understand." William Callahan joined Find the Way Home as a volunteer researcher in September 2003. He proved methodical, patient, skilled at navigating bureaucratic archives, qualities honed by years of precision machining. Within 6 months, he'd helped reunite 4 families. In 2005, Find the Way Home's success attracted attention from a private foundation focused on family reunification. They provided a substantial grant, allowing the organization to hire paid staff, expand operations, and develop a national database of institutional care facilities. Dorothy, now 52, stepped back from daily operations but remained board chair. William took on increased responsibilities. Together, they represented the project's origins, Warren's blueprint extended across time. In 2008, the Heinz History Center requested an updated exhibit on Riverside and institutional care, incorporating new research and Find the Way Home's impact. Dorothy and William collaborated on the design. The exhibit featured Warren's blueprints and William's maps side by side, with explanatory text. Twin brothers, separated in infancy, raised in different institutions, both spent their lives drawing maps of memory. Neither knew the other existed. Their work helped thousands of separated families find each other. The exhibit opened in November 2008. Attendance exceeded expectations. Many visitors were former institutional residents or children of such residents, seeking connection, validation, understanding. One visitor, a 71-year-old woman named Mildred Owens, stood before the display for nearly an hour, weeping. A volunteer approached, asked if she needed assistance. Mildred pointed to the blueprints. "I was there," she said. "Riverside. I was there from 1946 to 1951, ages 6 to 11. I remember that building exactly. These drawings are perfect. Who made these?" The volunteer explained about Warren, about Dorothy's discovery, about the investigation. Mildred asked to speak with Dorothy. They met the following week. Mildred described her Riverside experience. She'd been one of a handful of girls kept separately from the boys, subjected to different but equally harsh treatment under Whitmore's wife, Constance. Mildred had suppressed these memories for 60 years, never spoke of them, married young, raised children, lived quietly. Seeing Warren's blueprints broke something open. "I thought I was the only one who remembered," Mildred said. "I thought maybe I'd imagined how bad it was. But those drawings, they're proof. It was real. It happened." Dorothy held her hand. "It was real," she said. "You're not alone. Others remember too." Mildred joined a support group facilitated by Find the Way Home. There were now groups across Pennsylvania, descended from that first meeting in 1988. She connected with other former Riverside residents, shared memories, began healing. This pattern repeated dozens of times. Warren's blueprints served as catalyst, validation, bridge. People saw the drawings and recognized their own experiences, the precision, the care Warren took in documenting every room, every window, every door. It honored their memories, confirmed their trauma, made their suffering visible. By 2010, Find the Way Home had assisted over 900 families in reconnecting. The work expanded internationally. Inquiries came from people whose parents or grandparents had been displaced during World War II, sent to various care facilities, separated from families. The fundamental human need to know one's origins transcended geography. Dorothy turned 57 in 2010, her health declining, arthritis, fatigue, heart issues. She knew her time was limited. She began planning succession, ensuring Find the Way Home would continue beyond her. William, now 72, remained committed. His daughters joined the board. A new generation understood the mission. In January 2011, Dorothy was hospitalized with heart failure. Doctors stabilized her, sent her home with medications, warnings about stress. She ignored the warnings, continued working from her apartment, making calls, reviewing cases. One afternoon in March, reviewing files, she came across a case that stopped her. A 73-year-old man in Oregon, seeking information about his birth family, believed he'd been placed in Pennsylvania institutional care as an infant in 1938. The intake form listed his childhood name, Theodore Potter. Dorothy stared at the name. Potter. The same surname as Eugene Potter, the 12-year-old boy who'd hanged himself in Riverside's attic in 1949. Could they be related? She called the Oregon number. A man answered, voice uncertain. "This is Dorothy Callahan from Find the Way Home," she said. "You submitted an inquiry about Theodore Potter?" "Yes, ma'am," the man said. "That's me. At least, that's the name I was given at the children's home. I'm trying to find out if I had family before that." "Can you tell me when and where you were at this children's home?" Dorothy asked. "I was at several places," the man said. "Started at some county facility as a baby, I think. Then moved around. I have fragments of memory from a place in Lancaster County, maybe 1946 or 1947. Then they sent me to Ohio in 1948. I was about 10. "Lancaster County," Dorothy said. "Do you remember the name of the facility?" Long pause. "Riverside something," the man said. "I'm not sure. I was so young." Dorothy's heart began racing. "Mr. Potter," she said, "I need to ask you something. Did you have any siblings? Any brothers or sisters you remember?" The man's voice caught. "I don't know," he said. "Nobody ever told me. But I've always had this feeling, like I lost someone important. I thought maybe I was imagining it." Dorothy felt tears on her cheeks. "Mr. Potter," she said, "I think you had a brother. An older brother named Eugene. He was at Riverside. He died there in 1949, when he was 12 years old. He has a sister who's been searching for family. Her name is Sarah Sullivan. She's 79 now, lives in Lancaster. I think you might be her brother, too." Silence on the line. Then, very quietly, "He died?" "Yes," Dorothy said. "I'm so sorry. But Sarah is alive, and she's been looking for you for a very long time. Would you like me to contact her?" "Yes," the man said, voice breaking. "Please. God, yes." Dorothy called Sarah Sullivan that evening. Sarah, now 79, still sharp, still engaged with Find the Way Home's work. When Dorothy explained, younger brother, alive, separated, never knew about Eugene or Sarah, Sarah broke down. "I have another brother," she asked. "A living brother?" "Yes," Dorothy said. "His name is Theodore Potter. He's in Oregon. He wants to connect with you." They spoke by phone first, then arranged to meet. Dorothy facilitated, arranging travel, providing support. The reunion occurred in May 2011 at Dorothy's apartment in Pittsburgh. Neutral ground, supportive environment. Sarah and Theodore Potter sat across from each other, two elderly people connected by tragedy and separation. They spent hours reconstructing fragmented memories. Sarah remembered when Theodore was born, 1938, when she was 7. Remembered their mother dying in childbirth with a fourth child who also died. Remembered their father unable to cope, drinking, eventually abandoning them. She'd been old enough to go work as a household servant at 12, escaped institutional placement. But she'd lost track of both brothers. Now she learned. One brother dead at 12 in 1949, the other alive, found 62 years later. "You were named after our grandfather," Sarah said to Theodore. "Theodore Eugene Potter. Our mother loved that name. When Eugene was born, she gave him the middle name. When you came, she gave you the first name." I didn't know, Theodore said. The institutions just called me Theodore. I never knew there was a Eugene. There was, Sarah said, crying, and he would be so glad to know you're alive. This reunion, occurring in Dorothy's living room, surrounded by Warren's blueprints and decades of documentation, felt like culmination. The work had come full circle. Warren's silent trauma, given voice through Dorothy's persistence, had created mechanisms that brought hundreds of families together, including the family of the boy whose death had haunted Riverside's history. Dorothy's health continued deteriorating through 2011. By December, she required oxygen assistance, struggled with basic tasks. William visited daily, handling Find the Way Home business, keeping her informed. On December 18, 2011, Dorothy asked William to bring Warren's original notebook, the blueprints she'd found in the workshop 24 years earlier. William brought it, placed it gently on her bed. Dorothy opened it, turned pages slowly, traced the lines Warren had drawn. He started this, she said softly. He drew these pictures of pain, and we turned them into connections. That's alchemy, William, transforming trauma into healing. You did that, William said. Warren made the blueprint. You built the structure. We all built it, Dorothy said. Everyone who came forward, everyone who testified, everyone who helped a stranger find family. Warren and you drew the maps. We just followed them home. William took her hand. Thank you for finding my brother, he said, for telling his story, for making his life mean something beyond the pain. Thank you for finishing what he started, Dorothy said, for being the brother he never knew he had. Dorothy Callahan died peacefully in her sleep on December 23, 2011, at 58 years old. They found her in the morning, lying in bed, Warren's notebook open on her chest, a slight smile on her face. The funeral drew hundreds, former Riverside residents, now elderly, families reunited through Find the Way Home, volunteers, staff, board members, reporters who'd covered the story. Dr. Webb, now 86, Thomas Riley, retired but still sharp, Sarah Sullivan and Theodore Potter, William Callahan and his daughters. They buried Dorothy beside Warren in Allegheny Cemetery. The headstone, chosen by William, read, Dorothy Callahan, 1953 to 2011. She finished the search. She brought us home. Find the Way Home continued operating stronger than ever. Williams served as board chair until 2015, then passed leadership to a younger generation. By 2020, the organization had facilitated over 4,000 family reunifications, spanning 70 years of institutional separations. Warren's blueprints remained at the Heinz History Center, permanent exhibit. Thousands viewed them annually, including researchers, former institutional residents, genealogists, and people simply moved by the story of a man who drew his pain with such precision that it became a map others could follow toward healing. In 2025, on the 38th anniversary of Warren's death, the History Center hosted a special program, Blueprints and Maps, How One Couple's Story Changed Thousands of Lives. William Callahan, now 87, gave the keynote. Sarah Sullivan and Theodore Potter attended. So did over 60 people who'd been reunited with families through Find the Way Home. William stood before the display case containing his brother's blueprints and his own maps. My brother and I never met, he said. We were separated as infants, raised in different institutions, spent our lives in different cities. We both drew. He drew buildings, I drew roads. Different languages, same message. We're lost. Help us find the way home. He paused, looked at the audience. We didn't find each other in life, but Dorothy found us both. She found what Warren was trying to say through these drawings. She understood that his trauma wasn't just personal, it was systemic, and she refused to let it remain hidden. Because of her, because of everyone who spoke up, testified, searched, helped, 4,000 families found each other. 4,000 people got to come home. He pointed to the blueprints. These aren't just architectural drawings. They're acts of witness. My brother, at age 43, sat in his workshop and forced himself to remember every detail of the place that hurt him. Not to wallow in pain, but to document truth. He didn't know what that documentation would become. He just knew it mattered to get it right. William's voice caught. That's the lesson here. Precision matters. Truth matters. Bearing witness matters. Even when you can't see the outcome, even when you're drawing alone in a basement workshop, not knowing if anyone will ever see what you're making, you do the work anyway. You draw the lines. You measure carefully. You document what happened. Because someday, someone will find those drawings and understand. And everything changes. The audience stood, applauded. William wiped his eyes, smiled. After the program, people gathered around the display, sharing stories. A woman in her 60s approached William, introduced herself as the daughter of Leonard Brubaker, the first Riverside resident who'd spoken publicly in 1987. My father died in 2006, she said, but he always said Dorothy Callahan saved his life. Giving testimony, being believed, helping others, it gave him purpose. He stopped having nightmares. He reconnected with his humanity. Your brother's blueprints made that possible. Thank you for telling me, William said. Warren would be glad to know. The gathering continued into evening. Stories accumulated, connections multiplied. The blueprints, under glass, remained at the center. Quiet testimony to what one person's careful documentation could set in motion. William returned home to Buffalo late that night. In his study, he kept his own maps framed on the wall. Those hand-drawn charts of Erie, created decades ago in an attempt to make sense of displacement. Now he understood them differently. Not as evidence of loss, but as navigation tools. His unconscious effort to chart a path back to the brother he didn't know existed. He sat at his desk, opened a blank sheet of paper, picked up a pencil, started drawing. Not a map this time, something new. A family tree. Starting with himself and Warren at the bottom, working backward, filling in what was known. Parents unknown, separated 1938, institutionalized, survived, lived, died. Then forward. Warren's marriage to Dorothy, her work, the thousands helped. William's marriage, his daughters, their children. The tree grew across the page, branching, connecting. One separation in 1938 had created absence. But that absence, documented and witnessed, had created connections, hundreds, thousands of connections. Families finding each other. People discovering they belong somewhere. William labeled the tree the Callahan blueprint, smiled at the wordplay. His brother had drawn literal blueprints. This was the metaphorical one, the structure built from their shared loss. He finished the drawing near midnight, set down the pencil, studied what he'd made. Not perfect, not complete, but truthful. A map of connection built on foundation of separation. Pain transformed into purpose. Memory becoming legacy. Outside, buffalo snow fell quietly. Inside, William Callahan sat with his drawings, his brother's memory, and the knowledge that some searches never end. They just transform into different questions, different quests, different ways of finding home. The blueprints endure. In museums, in archives, in the work of organizations helping separated families reconnect. Warren Callahan's careful pencil lines, drawn in a Pittsburgh workshop in 1987, continue to guide people toward truth, toward family, toward healing. This is the story's end, or perhaps its beginning, because as long as memory lives, as long as people search for origins, as long as documents witness truth, the work continues. The blueprints remain, the search goes on. And somewhere, in the mathematics of it all, in the precision of those measured lines, Warren Callahan's quiet voice still speaks. This happened. This was real. This mattered. Remember.